Welcome to the Agents of Innovation podcast, where we feature conversations with entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and artists. Welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. I am your host, Francisco Gonzalez, and we've got another great guest today, Nick Bourdon. Nick is born and raised in South Florida. He is the co-founder of Reef Arches. We're going to get into all of that. But Nick, I just wanted to welcome you to the Agents of Innovation podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Francisco. This is great.
Yeah, so I got to know Nick over the last few months, and he lives in Miami now, and just like me, born and raised in South Florida. So we're going to get back to Nick's story in a minute, but if this is maybe your first time listening to the Agents of Innovation podcast, or maybe 152 times or so, welcome back to the Agents of Innovation podcast. And we just want to make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. So wherever you're listening or watching, you could watch us on YouTube, listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. Please go ahead and subscribe to this so that you'll hear not just Nick's story, but also learn about the future episodes of the Agents of Innovation podcast. In addition, a lot of the people who have been featured on this podcast are now featured innovators in the Fearless Journeys community. We do a lot of cool things with them, interact with them over things like dinners in Miami or road trips to Guatemala or other places around the world and the country. And so this is a great way for you to connect directly with some of the amazing guests that we've had on the Agents of Innovation podcast through the Fearless Journeys community. So I encourage you to go to fearlessjourneys.org. And if you go to fearlessjourneys.org/subscribe, or I guess it's /subscribe, I never get those slashes right, you'll get on our free newsletter and you'll connect with all the things we're doing around the country and around the world, and as we try to connect you with innovators across the world through the Fearless Journeys community. But we also want to hear what you think about this podcast. So as you're listening or watching on YouTube, we'd love to get some comments on the podcast as well. And here, let us know what you thought about Nick's story as well as it unfolds. So Nick, let's get back to your story. So born and raised in South Florida, I know you're primarily a self-taught software developer and a conservationist who enjoys hunting and fishing. Nick, tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to what you're doing today.
Sure. Yeah, so my background is, like you mentioned, I was born in Miami, then I moved up, around through Key Biscayne, Coral Gables, then Boca. But really my entire life has revolved around South Florida and just going out, enjoying, fishing, and most importantly, seeing how our environment has changed. So from there, I've always been interacting like most Floridians. They've seen the damages from hurricanes. They've seen the damages from, boat wick or erosion, what have you. So just throughout that journey, going from here up to Babson and coming back, I just saw that, this is a growing problem of just physics, and kind of rolled into what we're doing now at Reef Arches. So it was nice to finally have a business that helps my home and others.
Yeah, so Reef Arches is a really interesting company. So tell us a little bit exactly what the company does, its purpose, its mission, and what you do every day.
Yeah, so it's actually a really unique business. It's very different than when you hear online where it's like a software this, a crypto that. All are great, but mine is a actual concrete product that is 1,200 pounds, so half a ton. It is an arch that you place right on the shoreline. So you could see here, this is what it looks like 3D printed. It's 4 feet wide and 6 feet long, and you place it.
Yeah, what you're showing us there is just a model. It's a smaller version of the 4 feet long.
Yeah, it's 6 feet long and 4 feet wide.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a structure that basically trips the wave as it goes through, and as the water passes through the structure, you actually collect sand on the shore side, and you're able to restore a beach. So a little bit more complicated in physics, but it's the quickest method, the most natural-based solution you could get.
So okay, so we have a problem, and the problem is beach erosion. Is that primarily the problem? And
yeah, the primary problem is it's erosion, but it's caused by like wave attenuation. And wave attenuation is just wave action. It could be caused by boats, hurricanes. What ends up happening is, you get your erosion near all your properties, your hospitals, your military bases, your homes. So you kind of just need a structure that will protect it, but also won't fly away during a hurricane, right? We don't want this in someone's living room, like in the West Coast. So, but yeah, so that's kind of how it functions. And we've had some pretty successful projects, and it's a really nice way to give back. We could do all sorts of things: living shorelines, breakwaters, and coral reefs.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you because beach erosion is it's a problem of all time, right? I mean, like you said, like some of it's just totally natural. It could be the natural wave progression every day. It could be something catastrophic like a hurricane. Human beings may contribute by a lot more boating action and things like that. But what has been the traditional way that people have tried to counter beach erosion?
Yeah. A funny thing is, while doing my research, there's two ways. One, you hire a company to dump sand onto a beach. So most of the sand we see on our shores isn't natural. It's actually mined. So it's called beach renourishment. So option one, you forever pay to have sand on a beach. It's like throwing ice into, the
And that
Arctic.
sand's got to come from somewhere else.
Exactly. It's got to come from somewhere else. Or let's say you're in the intercoastal and you have like an inshore beach, right? Or some of those nice islands inside. You would have what's called a riprap or rubble fill. And they just kick rocks over a boat. That's been it. You just throw some rocks, some boulders, and you place it in such a way that you slow down the waves, but that's kind of it. There hasn't been
So
really
that's
any
kind of what
innovation.
we might see as and called jetties.
Yeah, jetties. I mean, you've seen seawalls, but there's been more negative impacts. You have to address the engineering issue as well, but primarily nothing has changed in the last 100 years. It's a wall, it's a rock, it's sand.
So how did you come up with the Reef Arch construction? Can you also remind us what it's made of and all that? And also, I understand, Nick, congratulations, in the last year or so, you actually got a patent for this device, right? For this,
Thank you. Yeah, we did.
whatever you call this device. I don't know. It's not a device like my phone, but we're all used to these words now. So this boulder constructed thing, you got a patent for it. So tell us, how did you come up with this idea and actually constructing it?
Yeah, so that's a really fun story because typically a business starts with, pen and paper, and then you try to seek, venture funding and what have you. That's not at all what we did. So 2 years ago, I'm at a company called Hedrick Brothers Construction, and they were really wanting to focus on recession-proof business models. But we're a developer and construction company primarily. So I was just looking around and I saw that there's opportunity for resilience, but we don't have an environmental division here, like at all. So I looked through, and the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, put out an offering, said we are going to spend $100 million as required by law. Who has any grant opportunities or any proposals? So I threw up about 3 proposals, partnering with 3 different cities across Florida, and all 3 happened to have been funded. So we got our initial tranche of funding, $1.5 million, and we kind of just spun Reef Arches out as its own entity. So this family office has been amazing, and we actually grew a team from there and was able to secure some of our initial projects.
So this is interesting. So first of all, that was the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, right? That offered those grants and then let me back up a little bit, because part of this story here, Nick, we talked about Reef Arches as if it's its own company, and it is, right? And you're the co-founder, but you have been working prior to that to what you said, Hedrick Brothers Construction, which has over 250 employees, primarily a construction and developer kind of company. How did you get, first of all, what role had you been doing for them before Reef Arches, and how did you get into that role?
So the role here was basically as a entry-level analyst and software developer. So I went in here and I was developing a lot of their internal tools, and just really making things streamlined. So I was saving the company quite a bit of money within the first year. And when I came up with the idea, I didn't know the family
You were
at this
saving the
office.
money in what way?
Well, we had a software here that effectively the price ballooned and it was going to cost the firm about $250,000 a year, give or take. Could have been higher. So I went in and I said, I'll just build it myself. And that saved the company a significant chunk of capital. That was one. Built out automations, built out the university program, training all of our employees. And then that was taken over by another colleague of mine here. So I just kept solving problems.
That's good. I mean, look, what I like to say is, as I outlined in my first book, with the 10 common characteristics of the entrepreneur, I think the number one on my list, I don't know if I want to rank them in any order, but, the entrepreneurs are problem solvers. So you are a consistent problem solver in everything you pointed out here. What's interesting to me, it's when I've been kind of listening to different things and, you know, we talk about AI taking a lot of jobs and we talk about, just there's like concerns about this. But what's
Yep.
also been interesting, and there's a lot of things, a lot of these software systems that are out there for, let's just say payment system, right? Like something like Stripe, or maybe a database like Salesforce, like all these sorts of systems that are large companies that are built for the masses in terms of like thousands. They have thousands and thousands of customers that are businesses, right? That maybe like a CRM like Salesforce or a payment system like Stripe. But I've also been hearing people say, if some companies are smart and they're able to like hire somebody like Nick, who's like can just build themselves like an internal software that they don't have to keep paying these other companies like all this like money. They can pay Nick, and Nick might not be cheap, but he's a lot cheaper than this. But also, it's something that could be internal, that could be lasting for multiple years. You don't have to keep paying all these things. So it's kind of interesting. It's a way in this day and age where somebody maybe like you, Nick, are using all the tools to your disposal. Maybe it's AI, maybe it's some other types of software, to do something more internal that can save your company a lot of money and allow them to do more things. So I just think that's something that a lot of companies should probably think about a little bit more. I mean, it's not for everybody. You got to have certain resources to be able to get to that point. But you're a real asset in terms of like you're a problem solver for this company that hired you, and then you guys went on. So maybe you want to comment on that.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. A lot of the companies do benefit from having their own software, and really comes down to like even customer service. Most people forget about that. So they get, married to this new tool. Now they have to train all their employees. They have to make sure who's going to fix any of the problems. They kind of get themselves locked in, and then they have to pay an arm and a leg. It's awful for them. But yeah, I just decided saying, let me just automate the proposal process. And now with the onslaught of AI coming in, I find that it would become extremely difficult to start a software company now to do it as a venture. Because as an investor, how are you going to differentiate between the two, right? Just from an entrepreneurial standpoint. But being that as my background, it was a tough sell in the beginning to say, hey, I'm your software guy, and I have this, this idea in concrete, in construction. It was a tough way to convince our owner first, and then eventually, after he said no like 4 times, on the 5th time he's like, this actually makes a lot of sense. It helps when you get some grants in. But
And this was you're referring to, was this for the software developer or was this for the Reef Arches?
this is for the Reef Arches. The software development was a huge portion of that conversation, because it's, hey, I as an employee have saved you X amount. So that's already money back in your pocket. Now, in this idea, are you interested in pursuing it? And your risk is much less because I've already saved you the money over here. So I was able to leverage the software skills, unlock that capital, and use it to, get an initial runway. But really, it came down to the trust and faith of our owner here.
So let me ask you, 250 people plus work for Hedrick Brothers Construction. how many are now tasked with being on the team for Reef Arches?
Yeah, so Reef Arches just ultimately spun out as its own company, and so I head their environmental division here. So we have two entities, one of which I've co-founded, and the other one I'm heavily involved in. So we keep it lean. We have around 4 to 5 team members, and we have a couple of external lobbyists and other groups that we hire outside. So call it by extension 10, give or take. So
Yeah, interesting. Um, so you also mentioned that Reef Arches has been able to get some grants with some particular cities or communities in Florida. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe some of the first cities and communities that have experimented with Reef Arches and not, I don't know if that was too light of a word, experimented, but have
not at all.
invested in what you're doing. But yeah, tell us a little bit about those first projects.
Yeah, so one of the really exciting ones is the Sebastian Inlet. So that's a living shoreline. And what a living shoreline is everyone has seen it. Usually you see it on the islands, like in the Keys. It's just a lot of rocks and some mangroves behind it. So we are able to use our arches because you plant a mangrove behind it. The mangroves, the roots grow through the structure, thus making a living shoreline. So that's a really fun project, and we're going to be making them like basically an Iron Man suit. So that's one. Our second project is with the town of Marineland. That's around 500 units for oyster restoration. So
For
those two
for
are exciting.
oyster?
Oysters, yep. So, and as another side point, the reason why oysters are important is because oyster reefs also used to be wave attenuation. Right?
Mm.
If you're from South Carolina or others, you would have seen like the oyster beds, and that slows down your wave energy. So we thought, why not? Let's find a way to grow oysters as well. So now you get a secondary purpose, water quality, right? Since the oysters clean the water, and you're able to get the wave attenuation to slow down the energy.
And where is
So
that oyster cultivation happening?
that's in the town of Marineland, and that is a town of 7 people in Florida, south of St. Augustine. It's a fun place.
You know, it's really funny that you say that. Literally just yesterday, I was flying back from North Carolina to Fort Lauderdale on a Delta Airlines flight.
Hmm.
And speaking of innovation, Delta's got this cool thing on the screens when you're looking at the flight tracker, like wherever you're going over, like all of a sudden it popped up like a little thing about St. Augustine because we were going right over St. Augustine.
Huh.
And then the next thing that popped up was Marineland. I swear, Nick, it was
Yes.
so. I feel like I got to go to Marineland now. 2 days in a row, I'm hearing about this Marineland. That's actually a
Well,
city.
well, not hardly a city. It's a very small town. It
Okay.
actually got its name. Funny you mentioned the airplanes, because echolocation was first found in town of Marineland because they have an aquarium and they had their dolphins that they were measuring, and their story is that echolocation was discovered there that was then used for military purposes now in planes.
Wow, that's really interesting. So, yeah. Anyway, yeah, because when I saw Marineland, I just thought it was like an attraction with dolphins or something,
Yeah, it used
like
to be.
Miami Seaquarium or something like that, right?
Yeah,
So,
you're right.
well, this is great. So you've got a few projects going on in so Sebastian, Marineland. Anything else you want? Any other projects you want to mention?
Yeah, our flagship product showcase is in Palm Bay, Florida, also known as Melbourne, Florida, on the Space Coast. That's a big one, and there's pictures on our website for it. But we basically changed the entire shoreline that was damaged from a hurricane. We put our arches, and we were able to deploy it in 4 days, and we basically created a seagrass haven, grew our oysters, made a living shoreline. I mean, we also built land. Like the sand accreted 10 feet behind our structures. That's a big deal to start building back a beach. I mean, that changed the entire trajectory of our business when we finished that
Well,
in
with
March.
all these new people moving to Florida every day, I mean, more Florida land is a great thing.
Oh yeah.
We're going to need every inch we can get. But this is an interesting conversation because no matter what one thinks of global warming, climate change, all these things, um, there has been this conversation about beach erosion being caught. It's caused by a lot of issues. But people like to say, for example, where you live, Miami's losing shoreline, or Miami's gonna flood one day. We're all gonna be underwater. Like I feel like I've been hearing this for many many decades. But so Reef Arches comes in. I mean, you got an innovation here to help that. But can you talk about? I mean, and also the other angle here that I'd like to. I don't know if this affects it. Maybe you can talk to this, but being in Miami, and I think you're down in Brickell there. There's a first of all, there's a housing crunch, right?
Yes.
Housing is very expensive, especially in Miami, but really all over Florida right now, with the supply and demand, really crunching it. But also, there's flood insurance is really expensive. All sorts of insurance in Florida is getting expensive. Anything related to property insurance, whatever. There's a lot of factors to that. I mean, we get hit by hurricanes occasionally. There's more people here. There's more people to insure. There's all sorts of issues. Beach erosion might be an issue. Global warming, climate change, all these things. So tell us a little bit. How do you think? What is the ripple effects that maybe something like Reef Arches could have preventing beach erosion? What are the ripple effects it could have throughout the economy?
Yeah. So that's a great question. A couple layers to that. When you have properties on the coast, the property values are always going to be high, and it's no matter what the danger or concerns are of the year, everyone wants to live by the water. That's forever a thing. So what we're trying to do is by slowing down the water, you've also reduced the risk, right? It's a lot easier to say, well, we're going to trip the wave 10 feet out, 30 feet out. You may have heard the term like barrier islands, or even the picnic islands there in the Grove. So like, those do a great job in protecting our beach, and that's why all the sailboats are behind it. So what we're trying to do with Reef Arches is to put these structures in front of the developments or hotels and say, look, we've slowed down the water. Your risk for flooding is less. That's significant. Now, can we translate that into now a lower insurance rate because you made your property more resilient? Now that's interesting. Couple that with now you made not just a barrier reef or a barrier system, you've now made a habitat. So now all your fish can go through, you created an amenity. It's a dual purpose solution. So, but if you attack the flood insurance problem, I believe you will be able to accelerate adoption and help homeowners.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I got a couple questions for you here. First of all, you mentioned Palm Bay near Melbourne,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking about not too far from Melbourne, Nick, is sort of the center of the universe. Actually, we got like three centers of the universe in Florida right now. We have the economic center of Miami, the political center of Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, and then we've got the space coast center of the universe going to Mars and wherever the heck else we're going to go. But we're sending Starlink satellites up like a few times a
Mm-hmm.
week. It seems like. I mean, hundreds per uh, per launch, I guess, are being launched, and we got this huge amount of space industry going on. And I'm thinking more land around the space coast. What can this do for Elon Musk, SpaceX, NASA, everybody else involved?
Um, Funny enough, part of the reason why we wanted to target the Space Coast with this project was because of the access to those locations. Like Reef Arches has a lot of military applications, and Space Force is right there. So that was an exciting example, a local example to show them.
Yeah, so
And
Space Force too, right? This is
yeah.
an arm of the U.S. military. This is our space military, basically.
Hmm. Yeah, so growing or having this opportunity, there in the Space Coast is a really nice way to showcase ourselves and then say, not only can we grow this opportunity here, can we now take it into a more heavily regulated area like Miami or otherwise, where there's tens of thousands of people constantly moving. But yeah, it's a good way to restore the shorelines because hurricanes are going to negatively hurt everybody. So,
Okay, so for those that might be watching on YouTube, and if you're just listening to this, you get kind of show and tell here on YouTube today with Nick. But Nick, can you give us that model again of what a reef arch looks like? So this is a very small version of what's a 6-foot long, 4-foot wide reef arch. So I want people to kind of envision that. So Nick, what about people that might say, these are not pretty things I want on my beach or near my beach. What would you say to those kind of obstacles that people might throw your way?
Totally. Yeah. So
And also, what's it? And also, tell me. And also, in your explanation, can you also tell us what that is made of? Is it biodegradable? Like,
oh yeah.
tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So we'll start with that one. So the Reef Arch is made out of sand and concrete, specifically CSA concrete. That's calcium sulfate aluminate. It's a concrete that's actually used to repair seawalls already, and it's used in power plants. But it also has a really fun fact. It's a very low in pH, so it's not acidic. So it is a pretty sustainable concrete in that regard. And also the design, we're able to use more premium concrete by also keeping our costs low because of the shape. So that said, when someone says, oh, I don't want a concrete structure in front of my land that's vanishing, I would say, okay, well, we could change the color, option one, right? So you could say we have ochre, we have a different variety of options we show them. Option two, we say, all right, well, we could put it out a little bit further, and the engineer would design it to be a breakwater, maybe out of sight. If it is closer to shore, then we suggest that they plant some mangroves, and then over time, you would have a nice mangrove canopy there. You could use any plant, but 9 times out of 10, they're so concerned of losing the properties. And I say, you could say no. You could wait. That's an option. And a seawall is more expensive, and riprap is pretty ugly. And your current solution of rubble, your rocks would roll. So that's not safe for kids to walk around because they're going to. But yeah, those are usually my suggestions. I just say you probably lost a lot of land before you talked to me. So how can I help you? So
well, no, that's a good point. I think when you say, do you want to lose your land or see these things that you don't want to see? It's you want to not see the land either, right? But you also brought up a word I was thinking of, and you were talking about children and safety. And yes. I was thinking about, what is the safety? Is there any risk if somebody, I don't know, walks on that, or they don't see it, they walk into it? Like, what?
Oh yeah.
Any safety concerns that someone might have having this out there?
Yeah, in the early stages, one of our inventor, Keith, he basically designed it as well to say, well, what happens if a kid starts walking on top? So we followed by putting this actual grid inside, so you can't put your foot through it. And also when you put these in a row, right, you won't be able to just go underneath it like a tunnel, right? We don't want anyone doing that. And same thing with manatees. So we put a cattle fence, and that's just prescribed by FWC laws. So we design it that way, design it to be safe for kids and for animals. So it's
yeah, I didn't even think about the animals, but yeah, I guess manatees, things like that. It doesn't look big enough for something like that to get there, but I guess it kind of is, small enough manatee or something.
Yeah, it's funny. They'd say it's like if it's 8 inches or more, because manatees can't go backwards. So they just kind of go into a place, and then they just stay there. So that's why we just cap it, and we keep the kids out as well. Make it fun. We want them to be enjoying the beach. So
yeah, that's good. Okay, so you answer a lot of questions there. So I think this is really good. But again, when I go back to your story, I'm trying to think of Nick Bourdon in high school, right? You grew up in you went to high school in Boca, right?
Yeah, I went to 2 high schools.
Okay, and then you go off to Babson College up in Massachusetts, and seems like there's so many great alums from Babson College, and Babson now has a campus or some sort of program in Miami as well, which is really interesting. And a lot of alums, for some reason, that are from Miami. I don't know what it is. And maybe you could tell us something about that. But what did you study kind of in high school and college what were you kind of interested in as a young person, kind of going off from high school to college, that you thought you might be doing, or the tools that you were trying to get during that time, or the experiences you were trying to get during that time to prepare you post college? Like who was Nick Bourdon? What was he doing during those years?
Yeah, in high school in Boca, my senior year, I just wanted to continue running my own venture, and I was really enamored with software, right? Build it once, copy paste it forever. So I love that. Um, but I didn't understand the business side of things. So I wanted to go to, a place that would kind of teach me entrepreneurship. So I focused on supply chain management to kind of help with the operations, call it business engineering. And then I really enjoyed commercial real estate. So I also studied that. Through that process, I jumped into multiple ventures, a bunch of internships as well. One of them was industrial upcycling. So one year I went to 13 different factories and helped audit their production systems and help patent new methods, new materials to reduce waste from landfill. So you help both sides. You create jobs, you help the environment, so everyone's happy. But really, I just wanted to start a business that was impactful. And there's nothing more resilient than weather. Because I'm like, if I wanted to continue in software, I'm going to get blown out. Even if you have a great team, I'm like, this isn't going to be it wouldn't be like a pretty reliable process, right? Imagine if you had started a company, then 1 year later, ChatGPT comes out and they say, we could do it too. That's brutal.
Yeah.
So I really focused on a company and a solution where as long as the moon is in the sky, we have tides. As long as we have storms, we're going to have weather and we're going to have erosion. So it doesn't matter what the economy is doing, you got to protect your land. So I thought, let's just get a patent, block out everybody else, and try to help our shorelines.
That's great. So Nick, you're very much you seem like you have a very strong work ethic. I mentioned this too because anybody that might follow you on, say, Instagram or whatever, you're up at insanely early hours, like 3, 4 in the morning. I mean, I'm like trying to be in the 5 a.m. club over here, and you're like, yeah, I'm up at 3:30, 4. You get so how many hours do you sleep a night? And and tell us a little bit about your daily routine.
Yeah, I have to blame my dad for that. He doesn't sleep well either. My dad sleeps like 4 hours. I sleep 5, 6, and that's it. So I would go to bed at like 9 and just wake up. So daily routine, wake up either, hopefully 5 a.m., sometimes 4. Um, and then, but yeah, like the other day was 3 in the morning. I said, oh gosh, now what? Um, so woke up, do some breakfast, then go over to the gym, plan out my day, answer a couple of emails. Sometimes I'll build another app. Like for Reef Arches, we have an app internally that I've created to keep us on track and communicate. Worked on that. And then after work, I'll continue with any other ventures, and I would do Run Club. I would go out to just really get engaged with the community, obviously do the Economic Club, and I would
Yes,
go out.
you're a fairly new member now of the Economic Club of Miami, so welcome aboard.
Yeah, it's been things like that, just socializing, meeting great people in Miami. That's really what I want to do. Um, to just start engaging with them more. So I really enjoyed that. And on the weekends, I'll sneak out for, some pheasant hunting or some fishing. So I like it. We call it research, on the water research, to make sure that these shorelines are safe.
Yes, and I know you're very much into a lot of different kinds of innovation. Recently, you have a new little toy that you have.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Um, yeah, this one. So yeah, we've created, actually one of our colleagues, Keith, made this. So this is how made to scale how we actually transport all of our structures. So that's a big deal in terms of speed and efficiency, right? Just like the supply chain, the Six
is that
Sigma.
like a typical like 18-wheeler truck or something with
Yeah.
is it open air like that, or does it enclosed that you put it in?
It would be open air. We have to strap it down, and it would be only 3 arches high, not 4 because of your load. But yeah, we would take the 1,200-pound units, and we're working towards a 3.5-ton unit. So that's how we're able to be more competitive. We could hold more per truckload than our competitors. So we make the cost more low and, make it more sustainable in that regard.
So, speaking of your work ethic and waking up early and all these things, one of the questions I like to ask people on this podcast is, what was your first job in life? And if you can think about it, it could be anything. One of the first things you got you did for work and you got paid for it, and then maybe there's something you learned from it that kind of sticks with you today.
I have to think about that. My first job, I guess the first one would be like an internship I remember I took in like when I was 18. It was that was my first paid position. It was in a corporate job, a company called Citrix Systems. So I walked in and God, I hated every day in there. I hated it so much.
Was this in Boca?
This was in their Fort Lauderdale campus. So I remember I walked in and everything was so dry and mechanical, and I was down in their sales room. But I was able to learn about how the sales process was. But I also learned that, oh my gosh, everything is defined for you. I'm like, the box is not only defined, but it is very thick. It is very dark. You can think outside the box, just not theirs. So that's where I knew after the end of that, I ran. I ran so far away from from that. I said, I never, ever want to take a job like that. So that's where it kind of kickstarted the entrepreneurial journey and say, if this is what grit needs to turn into to avoid this, I'm for it. And you get freedom, right? You get positional freedom. So yeah, that's totally fine.
So it's interesting, yeah, because I think the entrepreneur does have that different mindset of what you just mentioned. I mean, the freedom, right? You are probably working a lot harder, more hours, all these sorts of things to be able to do something more entrepreneurial than you would going to an office like that, where you clock in at 9, you clock out at 5, you have a lunch break, but you also have, a set salary, you have health insurance, all these benefits.
Yeah.
But there was too many kind of structures there for you, it sounds like.
Correct. And you couldn't go faster at all. It was just, this is your route. This is your tempo. Dance to the tempo.
So what's interesting about the company you're at now, and I've talked to other people who have maybe gotten a start in a company, similar like that. Maybe it's 100 employees, 250 employees, whatever it is. And they have thought of something that company could do innovative. So there's kind of two schools of thought here on this, right? You come up with an innovative idea of something that could be a successful product or service for customers, and you've kind of come up with it because of the work you're doing and the experience you're gaining within that company. And so I was thinking of another young person I recently met. It's probably around your age, late 20s or so. And they were talking to me about a product that they brought internally into this company. And they went, and kind of like you, like it sounds like, they went to their, no, I mean, it wasn't a product like you have. I'm just saying they had it was a whole different industry. I don't want to mention it because I don't want to give away who this is or whatever. But they brought this product, this innovation into the company, and the company, the higher ups said that's nice, but we're not interested. Like, we're not interested in doing that. And they tried a few different angles to try to kind of convince, because they thought we want to stay with this company, and we think they are very well positioned to have this new innovation inside the company. So the company wasn't interested, and this person and a couple other people within the company, they just started working on it on the side. And I don't know, 6 months, a year, or whatever it was later, they realized the side project was now successful enough that they could leave their company and create a whole new company doing this thing.
Nice.
And I thought that's interesting because they have, they're still early, but this is not the first time I've heard a story like this. So I feel like there's two kind of things. A large company might have some people inside it that come up with some kind of innovation that will not just, help customers, but will help the company. It'll be successful. These employees could grow into like a new role maybe. all these things. So within your company, it sounds like it took you 4 or 5 times to make the persuasive argument to the higher ups, but they were open to it at a certain point, and now this seems to be flourishing within the company.
Yes. It did take a couple iterations, and I think just listening to case studies like that and other stories, like the entrepreneur is saying, here's an idea that I think makes sense. But if it goes outside your current company's core competency, then they'll say, well, that's not, how does that align? Even if they want to, how would they even convince their own employees about that? So I had to craft the strategy to say, not only does the venture work, but also we have a development and construction arm. The environmental aspect first gets tipped off with any projects that come online. So I could say, whenever we get a project by a developer wanting to protect their coastline, they may need a construction company to do that. So that's where kind of fitting it in made a lot of sense. And our owner, Dale Hedrick, is extremely entrepreneurial. So afterwards, it was like, okay, this makes sense. And then his son, Parker, came on board, and Keith. So, invented it. So it took some massaging for sure, and trying to unlock the capital as well, to say, if I could help unlock some capital, help bring in the business model, and help convey the marketing messaging. Yeah. I think that's what every entrepreneur should consider if they want to make a spin out. Because if you get some support, especially like that company, it could make life a lot easier, or even support the venture. So that's super cool.
No, I just think it's interesting. So to me, I'm always thinking too, like when you're talking about helping people learn the traits of the entrepreneur, one of the things that I've come across, one of the things I've just come to believe is, you know what? Not everybody, probably most people do not really have what it takes to be an entrepreneur, because you really just need a particular kind of mindset, and you also need to be able to love what you're doing and put in all the hard work. You're only going to work that hard in that many hours if you really love what you're doing, and if you're really driven by something. But what's also interesting, that I believe, to kind of counter that in some ways, or to complement that, is I do believe that everybody can build an entrepreneurial mindset. So we can take the traits of like a problem solver, or maybe someone who learns by doing. They become more of a doer, like an entrepreneur is. And you can do that in anywhere you're at. So even if you're at a 9-to-5 job and you want the benefits, and you want to check in and check out a certain time and not have to think about something all day long, but you could still do something entrepreneurial within your own company, wherever you're at right now, and you're doing that as well within Hedrick and is it Hedrick Company?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Hedrick Brothers. Yep.
Hedrick Brothers Company, and starting Reef Arches. And so I think that's great. And I think about a guy I had on my podcast like 4.5 years ago, and he's featured in my first book, and that's a guy named Alex Goryachev. And Alex wrote a book, believe it or not, before I started a company called Fearless Journeys. I already had the Agents of Innovation podcast, but this guy wrote a book called Fearless Innovation. So we're in sync on a lot of levels. But he worked for Cisco Systems at the time, and within his book, he really talks about how large companies should be more open to working with startups, and they have the capital. The large companies have like the capital and the resources and the manpower and all these things that the startup companies don't have. But the startups are positioned to be more innovative, because once you get to be a large company, you become like that company you worked for when you were 18. A lot of structure, a lot of rules, a lot of things, and even you're a lot more closed-minded to something new and innovative. And that's where startups give so much life to our economy, because and to our lives, like innovations that they bring, because they actually think completely outside the box, but they oftentimes don't have the capital, which is why venture capital exists and all these sorts of things to invest in some of these startups. So, but if you could, within a large company, like let's say Hedrick Brothers, say, hey, we've got the resources, we got this innovative person on our staff who's basically wants to have this startup inside of our company. if somehow those two things can work well for each other, it's what Alex Goryachev said in his book, Fearless Innovation. That's the real juice that can really firepower kind of a startup venture and help those companies that are large not be so static and keep moving and keep being successful and keep being relevant.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the startups could even leverage the larger company's credibility, right?
Yeah.
I've noticed that startups could, you even if you have all the money in the world, you're going to run into a trust problem, right? They're just, I don't know this company. They've been around for one, maybe 2 years. So it's great to have another company that's established come in and say, well, I may not trust the startup, but I trust this. So if it's due diligence by proxy, then that's a great way they could get a leg up. So
my understanding is,
I
I don't know everything about the internals, but my understanding is Google does this really well. Like Google has all these like siphoned off startup type things within Google, and that's how they come up with all sorts of products. Even Facebook, and I had a guy on my podcast exactly a year ago, Michael Saman. He's actually from Miami as well, and he was an app developer, and he ended up getting hired by Facebook when he was 18. Well, he came into Facebook at 18. Meanwhile, Mark Zuckerberg's at like 40 at the time, like 38, 40. He had developed Facebook when he was in college. Now you got this young person who's a completely different generation who then basically went into the staff of Facebook and said, nobody my age, and this was, by the way, like 10 years ago now, something like 8 or 10 years ago. He's like, nobody my age is using Facebook anymore. Look at my news feed. Like no one's commenting, nothing's on it like it is for the 35, 45-year-old crowd. He's like, let me tell you where everybody is. Everybody's on Snapchat. And everybody loves these little Snapchat stories and updates, and things can disappear and all these sorts of things. Well, Facebook at that time had acquired Instagram. So this guy brought this innovation of the Snapchat into Facebook, actually personally taught Mark Zuckerberg how to use Snapchat, was snapping with him on the weekends, showing him different features of Snapchat. And then he got placed on the team that created Instagram stories. And that was, If you think about it now, like we almost don't live without Instagram stories. It's like, wait, there was a period like 8-10 years ago where Instagram stories didn't exist. And it's hard to almost imagine Instagram without the stories. And it's because of this innovative then 18-year-old within a company structure who said, hey, and by the way, give credit to Mark Zuckerberg and the Facebook team for being like, hey, let's listen to this 18-year-old. So I think this is, again, the juice that these companies, when you get the large company and maybe some young, innovative people with some ideas, that's where the real power lies, I think, in both helping the startup side and also helping that large company stay relevant and successful.
Yeah. Like look, listen, and live. Like those.
Yeah.
That's what the startups and these other companies should do. Just look what's around, listen to what the market's saying, and live.
And the great thing is somebody like you who's in your late 20s and I know you've been there for a few years now. You're able to also learn and be mentored by some of these great people that you're working for. And so mentorship is also just part of this equation as well.
Oh, completely. Yeah, it's been really humbling to talk to other, very successful guys and ladies in the space, just to listen to them and say, hey, I don't know how, but somehow, right, we're going to achieve this. And to your earlier point about traits as well, there's certain traits that you kind of need, right? Can you handle unknown and high stress situations, right? It could be a lot of tension. Things aren't going to go your way. So how are you going to deal with it? Move on, or maybe find a better solution, innovate or die type of deal. But it's really been because of the mentors that's helped guide this. This wasn't a one-man operation at all. It's been a lot of trials and tribulations, but with faith, walk by faith, not by sight.
Okay, so Nick, just the few last things here. Thinking about, we talked about some of the early projects that Reef Arches has had with some of these different cities, including Marineland and Palm Bay and Sebastian. So you talked about potentially developers, maybe hotels with beachfront property, anybody really with kind of beachfront property using them And also, you mentioned potential applications for the military to protect some strategic locations, that especially ones that are by the coast. As you're looking, if someone's listening right now, and you're trying to think about who's kind of maybe the ideal, customer out there, or the ideal types of projects or people who should be thinking about talking to you and reaching out to Reef Arches, who are those people, and what would you say to them?
Yeah, well, what I would say to them is call me immediately. Right? That would
How
be
can they
awesome.
reach
But
you, by the way? How can they reach you?
they just go to reefarches.com or email me at nick@reefarches.com.
Great. And I'll put
Um,
that in the show notes here as well, so people can easily find that.
Thank you. Yeah, what I would say is, so we're actually working with a couple resorts already to protect their shorelines. So that's great. The defense applications are extremely important because they're usually in a coastal strategic spot. So we'd be happy to help their shorelines. And we really wanted to hit into, residential as well, luxury residential. So that way you could place a structure and everyone can participate in helping their local environment. Take a 50-pound mini version of our arch, they could place it out in their backyard for like $300 a unit, and they'd be able to create a private aquarium, which would be super cool. Yeah, it's just different ways you want to get everyone involved to say, we all like clean water, we all like a healthy ecosystem. So we want to offer a way to do that.
So, by the way, I could see this really exploding because we're just talking about a few communities in Florida so far. Obviously, there's a big, large planet with a lot of coast everywhere. And
Yep.
let me ask you, are there any competitors out there? What's the competition for Reef Arches? I mean, I know you
Yeah,
got a patent for the actual Reef Arch, but
sure.
what's the competition?
Yeah, the main competition would be just legacy solution, which is rubble riprap mainly, because that's what all the engineers are used to because they've just done it. Now that said, and the engineers will more than happily pick a superior product or one that makes more sense. But in this market, it's very niche. It's about maybe five other competitors, maybe, and they all do a great job in their own right. So some are just focused on just as a breakwater. Some are focused on just as a, oyster recruitment. We just happen to be, you know, our focus was to be holistic and to try to hit living shorelines, coral reefs, and breakwaters. If we could do that, then we could have a pretty good standing, a pretty good grip on the market.
Well, that's
Yeah.
great. Well, I see Reef Arches as a solution primarily to the problem of beach erosion, but also I see it as a solution to bringing those the flood insurance rates down in
Oh yeah.
Florida and other places. And so I do again go back to my earlier point that I do think that this could not only could this really explode for you and your company, especially if it really kind of catches on and more people want to use this not just around Florida, but I mean around the world. But
Yeah.
also, I really just see this having an economic ripple effect of, one of the biggest things, one of the reasons we have the insurance to begin with is to protect some of these catastrophic situations, which this seems to prevent. So this seems like it would naturally bring down insurance rates and property values may go up as well.
100%. And we're working with some of the largest engineering companies in the country. We're actually scaling to go into Louisiana and Georgia for the same thing. It says you have to protect your coastline. Got to protect even your utilities, things that people don't see. Like, do you know where your local power plant is? Because it's near the water, right? The one in Miami, right? That's right on the water. So those are just some infrastructure things that people need to, resolve and fix. But there are global applications, and we are scaling to go there. So inch by inch, we'll make it,
Yeah.
Francisco.
Well, this has been amazing. I've enjoyed learning about your company and everything you're doing, and the kind of the journey you kind of took to get here, and seeing where your journey is going to go next, and how things are going to manifest themselves here. But I want to just give you any last words you may want to close with here before we sign off today.
Um, no, just thank you for the opportunity, and I definitely would say for any entrepreneurs listening is go after the project that you're thinking of. The worst that they can say is no. right? But even if it's a no, qualify it. Just keep trying it. And then once you get to that yes, don't let it go. So
that's great. And by the way, I do think on that point that a lot of times the no is it's giving you as the entrepreneur an opportunity to figure out why did they say no, and what do I need to be thinking about differently to get them to say yes. And like you already demonstrated how you did that earlier, and it helped you maybe retool the purpose for the Reef Arch and the purpose as it relates to your company, Hedrick Brothers. So really great. So Nick, I want to thank you for being on the Agents of Innovation podcast, and also for being an agent of innovation yourself. We will provide all the details about you, how to find you in the show notes. I just want to thank you again for being on the Agents of Innovation podcast.
You got it. Thanks for having me, Francisco.